Welcome back to the Lost in Transit podcast. I am your host, Spud Groshon. My guest this week is award-winning photographer Jody MacDonald. Jody has sailed around the world on a decade-long kiteboarding expedition, jumped trains in the Sahara, drove a rickshaw across Europe, and has been on many other countless adventures. Jody sees the unknown and documents it along the way. Jody has worked for the likes of Patagonia, Leica, Red Bull, BBC, and has even taken the TEDx stage. I'm incredibly excited to bring you this conversation I had with Jody. I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed having it. All right, welcome to the podcast, Jody.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So when I initially found out who you were and about some of your photos, it was oddly enough through one of those like spam articles on YouTube about your train trip through the Sahara.
It's really weird.
It's incredibly weird because it was one of those I was just started reading it and I was like, whoa, these photos are incredible. This trip sounds like it's outstanding. And I just started digging a little more and I found out about the boat journey you did and some of the other stuff that you had done, and I was just blown away. And I think that had to have been 2 years ago, maybe now, that I've been following you on Instagram and such. But so if you could, for the listeners, could you give them a little background on your travel experience? Like what got you into it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Canadian, but I live in the States now. But where I was born in Ottawa, Canada, and my dad worked for a Canadian telephone company called Bell Canada at the time. And they got a big contract to like set up the telephone system in Saudi Arabia. So I ended up moving to Saudi when I was 2 years old. And I spent my whole childhood there. And when families move to places like the Middle East, these companies give them a lot of incentives to go. So one of the big perks we had was they paid for us to go on vacation. So all our vacations were paid for. And my parents had never traveled anywhere. So they were like, oh my God, we're taking advantage of this. So every, school holiday or any kind of break we had, we went traveling somewhere in the world. And I ended up leaving Saudi, moving back to Canada when I was 15. So by then I had seen a huge part of the world because of these perks that we were getting, and my parents just taking full advantage. So, that definitely instilled in me this, and the love for travel. I mean, I think early on I got a glimpse into just like how incredible the world was. And I tell people I started dreaming about Indiana Jones because of my travels when I was young. And I was like, I just want to be an adult. Like, I just want to grow up to be Indiana Jones, and I want to go off to far off places and have these great adventures. And so it was definitely my childhood that really gave me the adventure travel bug at a really early age. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, is there one specific from your youth that is something that sticks out mostly that might have been the nail in the coffin, so to speak, that you were bit by the bug forever?
No, I mean, I think it was a culmination of them all, because my parents, interestingly enough, we went to Europe, but we traveled more to kind of like off the beaten path places. We, spent a lot of time in other parts of the Middle East or different parts of Asia, and a lot of those memories in some of these just kind of more off the beaten path locations really instilled it. I think two highlights for me were that I remember vividly was we did this safari in Kenya, and we were just staying in these tents in the middle of, nowhere. And I remember hearing all the animals at night, going by your tent, and the tigers and the lions. In the middle of the night, they would have these like alarms that would go off when like a leopard would come in to feed somewhere. And then I remember in the middle of the night, we'd hop in these trucks and, be in the jungle at these little, lookouts and watch the leopards. And actually one of those, when we were doing that, my brother had this huge snake on that ended up crawling onto his arm while we were like watching the leopards in the dark. And we, shone a flashlight on him, and everybody was like freaking out. And they remember the guide saying, "Oh, that's one of the most poisonous snakes in the world. You're really lucky you didn't die." And it was those trips. I mean, I loved that kind of adventure and traveling. And it was like those kinds of memories that really stood out to me.
That's an awesome memory. I would have been petrified if I was your brother, though.
No, he loves snakes, fortunately, which is why he didn't move. But yeah, I was thinking, it was like a good thing it happened to you, or else somebody else might be dead,
Yeah, I would have lost my mind.
Yeah.
Snakes scare the living daylights out of me. Okay, so moving back to Canada then, and then you moved to the States. How did your 10-year boat journey begin?
Yeah, so I had been living in actually Vancouver, Canada, and I was a photography editor at this. It's a Canadian outdoor. It's Canada's largest outdoor retailer. So it's the Canadian version of REI or Patagonia in Canada.
Okay.
And I was the photography editor for them. And at the time, I was dating this Alaskan bush pilot, and he was a big surfer and very, very adventurous guy. And he would come visit me in Vancouver, and he was like, "What are you doing? Like office job stuff? Like this is sucking your soul out of you, And I was like, "Oh yeah, I know." But I also really loved the photography editing side of it. So eventually he wore me down, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm not learning anything from this job anymore. So it's probably a good idea for me to move on and do something." And he said, "Well, why don't you quit your job, and we'll go on like a 3-month kind of like just, adventure where we would travel around, live in the van, and go surf and paraglide along the western coast of the States. And, just have a great time and kind of step back from everything and try to figure out my next steps." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." And then on my very last day of work, it was noon, and I was going to actually end at around 2. And I got a phone call, and I got a phone call saying that he had actually died in a paragliding accident that morning.
Oh, Lord.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So, yeah, and I had like given up my rent and, kind of closed up shop on my life in Vancouver. I quit my job and everything. And I was like, wow, this is, this throws a wrench in the works for sure. And then, I just decided to keep doing what we were going to plan to do. Because I just couldn't, I felt like, deciding to try to get my job back and getting my apartment back was kind of moving backwards. Like I had already moved on from that. I was prepared to move on from that life for a reason. Mm-hmm. And so I just felt I had to do that. And then to make a long story short, I was traveling around, doing, all that stuff, just kind of camping and hiking and paragliding and surfing and stuff on the coast. And then I met somebody who just said, "Hey, like I run these charters in the South Pacific. Do you want to come out and, see what it's like?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll give it a try." And then I ended up flying out to New Zealand and hopped on this boat. I mean, I helped with the refit because they were in the middle of a refit. and then started that way actually. And then I was seasick, and I don't know if you've ever seen my TED Talk, but I talk about one of the worst sailing experiences I'd ever been to and and it was so horrific. And I had only been sailing for like a couple weeks when that happened. So I was just like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. And just being seasick and everything, and just, it was very, very challenging. And then I ended up sailing for 10 years actually, and starting a new business with it. And
Okay.
So it ended up being this crazy adventure.
And it took you around the world twice, you said?
Yeah.
I think I read. From that, you had to have gone to some insanely remote places, no?
Well, yeah, we actually are. So I ended up co-creating this company that does 5-year world kiteboarding expeditions by catamaran. And so essentially it takes us 5 years to circumnavigate. And we follow the trade winds because that's good for kiteboarding. But we specialize in remote locations. So that's really our specialty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense. So I did recently watch your TED Talk again, just to kind of hear that story about the storm. And I don't think I would have gotten back on that boat again.
Yeah, well, I remember when we sailed into the harbor in Fiji, I was like, there's no way I'm getting on that boat.
What had changed your mind to get back on it?
It's really funny. I just took a couple days, I stayed in a hotel for a couple days, because you need to recoup. I hadn't eaten in like 9 days. And you're not sleeping very well, and so you're just totally obliterated. And I think I kind of associate it a lot like when you go through something that's really painful, like how quickly you kind of forget the pain. I know it's horrible, and I knew it was really bad, but I think very quickly you kind of forget just how bad it is. But on top of that, I felt like I just told myself, you know what, if I go home right now, I'm going to regret it. Like, I'm going to regret quitting, because I'm in love with the idea of exploration so much that I was like, I have this amazing opportunity to get to these places that most people never go to. And I probably won't get this opportunity again. So, and I just felt like, you know what, if I just quit because, that was the worst trip I've ever been a part of or been in, then I'll regret it. So I felt like I'm just going to keep going longer and see if it only has to get better from here. I felt like that was kind of like the worst case scenario almost.
Did it ever get worse, or was that ultimately the worst case scenario?
Yeah, I think that was the worst case scenario.
Oh, yeah. So it was out of the way at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's not terrible at all then.
No, except for, I did stay seasick for pretty much for the decade. But other than that, you learn to manage, I learned to manage my seasickness. So I think, that it was tolerable, I can say.
Yeah, I guess seasick could be bad but like you said, you managed it. So that's not terrible.
Yeah, I just dealt with it. So, yeah.
So in that 10-year trip, do any places stick out in your mind that might be a favorite?
Of course. I have a ton of them, but some of the areas for sure, West Papua. Which is Indonesia, but the western side of Papua New Guinea, and Papua New Guinea itself. I went there on the boat 2 years ago, and it was one of the most amazing places I've ever sailed. Yeah, so Papua New Guinea, Western Papua, I actually love sailing through all the Indonesian islands. That's definitely, that whole area is a huge highlight for me. And then really unexpected places, kind of like Scotland.
That's weird.
Yeah, the Outer Hebrides in Scotland were, wow. I mean, I think we were really reticent because it's, you know, a very cold place to sail, and we had been always in these really tropical areas. So we ended up in the Outer Hebrides just for kind of like a change of pace and to see something different. And man, it was so magical and so beautiful in a way that I never anticipated. So that was a really big surprise. And then the San Blas Islands of Panama, we really enjoyed those. And then when we got to like the Marshall Islands and Palau or Yap, getting way out into Micronesia was fantastic too.
It all sounds outstanding.
Yeah.
I try when I travel to kind of try and get away from things, but I don't think I do anywhere near as good a job as it seems like you've done over your whole career, just getting out and being in the middle of nothing.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I really love it. I really love kind of being in the middle of nowhere. And there's such I think an unexpected beauty in those places that makes me really excited to go to more places like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just natural beauty, I think, that draws us back to places that are empty.
Yeah, like the Sahara is a great example. When I did that trip on the train, man, I grew up in Saudi, so I was around desert, but not like that. I mean, I was like, this is so desolate, but it kind of like forces you to pay attention to the details around you. And when you start doing that, you're like, wow, this place, it's amazing. There's so much going on in a place where you think there's not much going on, mm-hmm. you know? And I love that unexpected side of it.
The majority of my life, I always thought the desert and things was just like exactly that, drab and boring, kind of brown. And now that I'm starting to turn a new leaf and starting to kind of want to adventure and see more of the desert, and after seeing those photos and reading about that trip, I was pretty stunned.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a ton of people contact me and they're like, I'm going to Mauritania. I'm like, okay. Oh, that's funny.
What was the catalyst for jumping the train in Mauritania? Like, how did that come about?
Well, I actually had a friend of mine do it in like the early 2000s.
Okay.
And he filmed it on this like crappy old camera. And he showed me the video and I was like, oh my God, I am doing that, you know? And then I got this then Leica camera company contacted me and they said, oh, we're coming out with this all weather camera and we'd love for you to take it somewhere and just kind of, you know, put it through its paces, like somewhere that's really challenging and, you know,
yeah,
and take pictures of it and see how it does. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? I mean, I pitched them a few ideas, but the train idea has always kind of been in the back of my mind. And I was like, oh, this is a great kind of adventure to take that camera on.
Awesome.
And so that's how that all came about. But yeah, it was really a friend who had done it who it just was immediate.
Was the inspiration?
Yeah, for sure.
Love it. Okay, so I noticed through your Instagram stories and stuff, you kind of keep everybody up to date on like your travels and what you're doing. So I distinctly remember following along while you were in India, traveling by rickshaw.
Yeah, last year I did the length of India in an auto rickshaw.
So
So I am curious, was this the Adventurous Rickshaw rally thing, or was this just on your own?
It was the adventurous thing. It was like that was my vacation.
That was your vacation.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I like to do for my vacations. I don't like going to the beach and hanging out at a resort or anything.
That's incredible. How was it traveling through India on the rickshaw? I've looked into basically all of their trips, but I've never actually pulled the trigger on one yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would love to do it again, but I would love to do it on my own, rather than it be like a race. Even though the race, I mean, it was a fantastic experience. I mean, if those kinds of races is what gets you to have those adventures, then that's great, I think. And then the really great thing about the Adventurists is that they're all about not having any rules. I mean, I remember when we left, all they said to us was like, don't go into Pakistan, like don't cross the border into Pakistan. And then because where you would likely enter into Pakistan, there's a lot of terrorist activity going on, so don't go there. And then they literally just said, there's no other rules. If you come in first, you're an asshole. You don't get the point of this race. So don't do that. Don't be that guy who wants to come in first. He says, and they say, like, really the winners are the people who come in last. And I agree with that 100%. And because they're having the most fun for sure. And then they just said, like, even if your rickshaw gets totaled and run over, you still have to get it to the finish line. So they're like, you still have to put it on a flatbed truck or do something to get it there. And I was like, oh, I like these guys.
It's been something I've followed for, I think, since I took my first solo trip in like the late 2000s. And I've watched them like change varieties of trips and this and that. And this one has always been the one that I kind of was like, oh, that's got to be something I can find somebody to do.
Oh, you could for sure. I mean, actually, a couple of my teammates, they couldn't make it last minute. And I just put out on Facebook. I was like, hey, I'm taking a rickshaw across India. I'm leaving next week, or who wants to come with me? And I always think that's a great gauge of who your really great friends are. Like, because I think the spontaneous people are really interesting. I got two teammates and we just went, but I just threw it out on Facebook. And, one of the people who came with me, I had met once paragliding in Africa. So I didn't really know her very well. And it worked out great. And then my other one ended up being an old assistant of mine, and he's fantastic. So it ended up working out really good.
That's amazing.
But I think if you throw it on social media, you really don't have a hard time finding
somebody to do it.
You shouldn't have a hard time finding people to jump on that.
So do I remember correctly seeing you guys trying to get the rickshaw on a train?
Yeah, that was amazing. That was the highlight of the trip, actually.
What made it the highlight?
It was the very definition to me of why India is so amazing. I mean, they have so many rules, but all at the same time, anything is possible. So a great example is we got pulled over once because we were riding our rickshaw on the highway, and they're not, some highways, they don't allow them.
Sure.
And we got pulled over, and the cops were like, you can't do this. We're going to give you a ticket. And you kind of learn along the way how like India works. And we just say, well, we don't want a ticket. And they'd be like, okay, like, okay, no problem. We won't give you a ticket.
And then they just let you go?
And they just let us go. But the train thing was amazing because we got to the train station in Mumbai, and I just assumed that you would be able to get a rickshaw on a train in India. And I don't actually know why I assumed that, but I did. And then we got to the train station in Mumbai, and just getting to the train station in Mumbai on a rickshaw is insane. It's like the heaviest traffic I've ever been in.
Okay.
There was so much traffic in some intersections that I was like, I don't even know how this could ever let up, you know?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There's like so many people and cars in such a small space. You're like, nobody has anywhere to go. But I don't know, somehow it works. But anyway, we got to the train station, and then we started asking around, and they're like, no, you can't put a rickshaw on the train. And we're like, really? Like, there's no like storage areas on the back of the train? And they're like, yeah, there is, but like a rickshaw won't work. You can't put a rickshaw on there. And we were like, oh man. And then like when we talked to somebody, they said, oh, well, you should go talk to this manager. Like in India, they love to kind of pass you off.
Sure.
To somebody who might know more, which is great. So, you know, go talk to this person. We'd go talk to that person, and they'd say, oh, well, go talk to this person. Anyway, we ended up getting access to the head of the railway system for all of India. And I don't even know how that happened, but we ended up like walking into the office. And we're waiting there, and this like gorgeous woman walks in, and she was like the head of the railway system, and she's like really highly educated, spoke like impeccable English, and we just sat down with her, and she's like, oh, you know, hi, why are you guys here? And so we just explained like we're in this rickshaw race, and we're trying to get into Rajasthan, and we would love to, you know, put the rickshaw on the train, and this is why. And we were showing her photos, and she just thought it was the funniest thing. Like, she just thought it was hilarious. So she's like, okay, well, we'll see if we can work. And as soon as she gave us permission, it was like the seas parted. And so we got escorted with the rickshaw through in the middle of the train station. And everybody was just standing and watching us. And then it was so funny because I just assumed that these guys knew the measurements of the holes, like of the doorways into the train cars. And I thought like they would know if it would fit or not, but they didn't. It turned out that they didn't actually know. So we were waiting for the train, and we only had, like a pretty small window to try to get it on the train. And the manager of the train station in Mumbai, he was relatively new, and he was really nervous because he had never done this before, and he didn't want to fail at his job. Yet he had orders from, the head, top brass, and it was like, oh my God, I have to make this work somehow, but I'm not sure if it's going to. And he was super stressed out. And then when the train showed up, and we got all this help to try to get it on, and I'm sure you've seen the Instagram videos, but like it turned out that they wouldn't even fit in the hole. And then we had the rickshaw like half hanging on in the car and half hanging off. And then like the bell, the train horn's going like it's getting ready to go. And we were like, well, you can't, like the train can't leave because the rickshaw is half hanging off the back of the train, And anyway, so he starts like panicking, and they start deflating the tires to see if it'll fit. And then they just took a crowbar and started crowbarring off the wheel wells. And the manager turned to me and he's like, do you want to take your rickshaw off the train? And I'm like, well, if it's not going to fit, I'll take it off. Like the train's about to leave, And I'm like, this is your call. I mean, this is totally up to you. But anyway, as we were having that conversation, I was fully getting ready to say, no, it's not going to work, pull it off. And like, as I was uttering those words, the guys ended up pushing it onto the train. And I was like, what? Never mind, and then we had to run like half a mile to get onto the train car to get into our cabin to get it. But yeah, it was insane. And then we got worried about getting to the end destination and trying to get it off the train, because they told us we only had a 5-minute window at that train station.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, it was this huge, crazy adventure. I mean, and it was such a highlight. Like we really did something that, like, everybody had said they've never seen ever happen at an Indian, on the Indian train system. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
There's a first time for everything, right?
Yeah. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, I remember taking the train in India, and just even with just the people, it seemed like it was a stressful situation. I can't imagine what it's like trying to shove a rickshaw on and then getting to where you're supposed to be seated.
Oh yeah, that was a whole other experience in itself. And then we ended up, arguing with this Indian family who had like 50 bags with them, like about because you get assigned, like we were assigned sleeping beds, yep. and they claimed to be assigned to them. And then, so yeah, when we got on, we ended up, getting in this whole other, having this whole other experience. But yeah, it was all part of it. I mean, it was all fantastic.
And then where did you get off the train?
We just, so what we were trying to do is we had come up from Cochin, so the very south.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had been over a week. And we had experienced highway driving, on some sections, and it was absolutely horrible. So they would have these like speed bumps every 100 feet on these highways that were going, like these major highways that you'd be on for hours, but you could never pick up any speed because of these speed bumps. And they were filled with these massive diesel trucks. So it was like super hot, and you would be like stuck with all these, diesel smelling trucks and not moving very fast. And I had messaged a bunch of people on social media, and I had said, is there anything north of Mumbai, between Mumbai and Rajasthan, that's worth seeing, that's off the beaten path, so that we could we could not take the highways, that we could go around and maybe have some cool side adventures on the way into Rajasthan. And everybody who messaged me back said, no, there's that's a stretch where there's nothing really going on, that you're going to have to take the highway. And so we were like, no way. I don't want to go. I think it was like 300 miles or something. I was like, I don't want to do that on the highway. We've already experienced that. It's horrible. I was like, let's try to get it on the train, and there was no rules to the race. Yeah. So I was like, let's just see if we can get on the train, because then we can just sleep overnight, and then we can wake up. And we really wanted to experience Rajasthan, because Rajasthan's amazing. And so we just decided, well, let's just take the train from Mumbai to the very border of Rajasthan, get off, and then keep driving, so that we can, just really get to have adventures in Rajasthan. And so that's what we did. But if the train thing didn't work out, that would have been a really big bummer, because we kind of had gone way out of our way to Mumbai to try to make the train thing work.
Yeah, and I would assume even just with the traffic and stuff in Mumbai, it would have been a pretty hefty delay. Yeah,
oh, completely. Yeah, I mean, we ended up, we were traveling with another rickshaw for a little bit, and we had told them, hey, do you want to come with us to try to get the rickshaws on the train in Mumbai? And they were like, no way, we're not going into Mumbai. We don't want to drive into Mumbai. But they didn't also think it would work, and so we got lucky.
Yeah, that sounds so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fantastic race though, because you're mostly on your own, like in terms of the other race people. Like you hardly ever see anybody because everybody's kind of taken off doing their own thing. But then, you know, you could be in some remote area and then all of a sudden you see one of the other rickshaws and you're like, hey, sharing stories is crazy. I mean, you get invited into Indian weddings and, you know, people love you. Like the Indians love seeing these foreigners driving their own rickshaws. And so it attracts a ton of attention and people invite you into their house. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. When I was in Calcutta, I was just walking by and poked my head in a door and actually got pulled into an Indian wedding.
Yeah. Was it not? It must have been amazing, I'm sure.
Oh, it was outstanding, but we felt so incredibly awkward because it was just kind of like the groom was stoked to have the two of us there, and then everybody else was like, what?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times, like as a foreigner in an Indian wedding, you're kind of treated like a celebrity. You know, they're so excited to have Westerners there that you end up getting almost more attention than the bride and groom. It's really funny.
It's pretty outstanding.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've just got like random questions, a couple that I want to throw by you.
Sure.
So I've read somewhere that you try and obviously stay away from touristy areas. How do you manage to kind of get away when you go someplace new that's not necessarily touristy or kind of just out to what seems like the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I think, always rule number one is never look at a Lonely Planet book. But, I usually do a fair amount of research when I'm in an area because I'm usually working or doing a project. And so like I think research helps a lot because it kind of gives you a starting place of what you're working on, and the stories I'm generally working on aren't in tourist areas at all. So that, I think that makes it quite easy. And then once you just start spending time somewhere, you learn really quickly where it's really touristy or where it's not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess this kind of goes back to the rickshaw thing. Other than say that, for example, how do you, when you're not working, how do you spend your time? Do you travel? Do you stay in Idaho? Do you?
Yeah. For me now, it's funny. I think when you travel so much and you travel a lot for work, a lot of my vacation is when I'm home. For me now, that's pretty much my vacation. Or I do something like, the rickshaw thing across India. That's, if I want to take some time off and have fun, I like to do stuff like that, or stay home. So it's, one of those two things.
Home is a vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. For my career, I work in the music industry and travel, tour with bands. And I actually have the word vacation tattooed on my knuckles because I'd had a really bad tour and I was going home and we were just all exhausted, and I bored in the back of a bus writing on my hands and wrote vacation one day, and I was like, oh my God, it's perfect. My vacation from my work is home.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now it's like I don't spend much time at home. I try and travel as much as I can even when I'm not working.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I have a tendency of not planning.
Yeah, me neither. I think I learned through sailing that the planning in a lot of ways is a huge waste of time, and it kind of and then it creates a certain expectation, and that's where I think then you end up getting disappointed. I think it's much better to be open to different possibilities and be open to the unexpected, and then you seem to always be pleasantly surprised, and end up having this great trip or experience as a result. I think when people like plan a ton, it's like, well, things don't go according to plan. And if you hope they do, then you're going to be spending a lot of your time being disappointed.
Yeah, I've had that experience actually before, being disappointed with traveling with people. It's like, it's very odd to watch somebody get upset because something in a foreign country that they've never been, like, they don't speak the language, they don't know what's going on, they get upset because something didn't go their way.
Right.
Okay, so another one of these random questions I have is, in the day and age where everybody is mindful of the earth and the humans' impact on it, what are some things that you think travelers could do to help reduce their impact on the earth?
Well, I mean, I think that's hard because the very nature of travel is greatly impactful. I mean, I just, in general, I mean, the single-use plastic is a big deal for me because, sailing, I saw so much of it in the oceans, and I'm really disturbed by the single-use plastic issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I always just, always have I try to have a refillable water bottle anywhere that's doable. There's a lot of places like India, for example, that you just can't do that because you can't get, fresh water sources to refill the bottle. You need to be buying new bottles. But in countries I can, I do that a lot. I'm just always trying to not buy plastic or use plastic bags. But I mean, I think in terms of, you can do research on the places you're staying or some of the places you're staying. And if they're kind of doing the right thing, trying to do the right thing for their community environmentally, is great to support, those companies or hotel chains or not even a chain, but any kind of accommodation place that's conscious of that. And then, I just think respect's a huge thing. Just trying not to be an asshole and do things that you wouldn't do at home, or disrespect, just throwing garbage around. I mean, it's a really tough thing though. I mean, I don't think there's any like one great solution for it, for sure.
Okay. So then here's just the last of my random nonsense questions. Do you have a travel philosophy?
Oh my God. I mean, I think going back to what we were speaking to earlier, I think a big part of my philosophy is being open to the unexpected and being able to adapt and change plans or, on a whim. I think that's so important to like have more valuable, meaningful, and really enjoyable travel experiences. And try really hard not to have preconceived notions of maybe your own cultural belief system. Like try not to impart that onto somewhere else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that part is hard for a lot of Westerners.
It's so hard, but I think it's really important to try.
Oh, it's absolutely.
It's really hard when all you know is what you know, right? Mm-hmm. But I think if you can just stop and say, well, hey, they do it differently here, and that doesn't mean it's bad or good. Let's kind of be curious about this, and let's see why they do things this way. I think curiosity goes a long way instead of judgment. And just kind of being open to those differences and trying not to judge them because they're different than your own.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually, so a handful of podcasts ago, I had reached out to a bunch of people and I had messaged Amy Vitale,
Yeah.
And like hers was basically curiosity. That was it.
Right.
And I was like, that is the best of all of them. Everybody, it's shorts and a camera and this and that and blah blah blah. And hers was just like, be curious.
Yeah, mine's curiosity and toilet paper, because I've had enough parasites and dysentery to if I'm like, there's so many times where I've like, oh my God, I need toilet paper. And so now I just don't go anywhere without it. So I always think if you've got curiosity and toilet paper, you're doing pretty good.
That's like the name of a George Carlin book or something.
Actually, you're right. That'd be a great book. I mean,
it's so funny.
Buy it.
That's great. Well, I'm gonna wind this down, and I just want to ask if you have any final words for the listeners, any advice or anything towards travel.
I mean, again, I think it goes back to a lot we were just talking to. If you can, just try to be respectful of differences and have curiosity, and try not to overplan your vacations. And I would also say, when things aren't necessarily maybe going the way you want them to, or things are going bad, that to try to shift your perspective and see like the benefit of that scenario. Because I often believe when it gets bad, it really is just starting to get good, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That would be.
And then if you could tell everybody where they can follow along on your adventures and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so the main one would be my Instagram account at Jody MacDonald Photo. My website as well, jodymacdonaldphotography.com. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter sometimes. And my Facebook's Jody MacDonald Photography, and my Twitter is Jody Photo.
Jody, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It was fun chatting with you.
So, what did you think? That was my conversation with Jody MacDonald. Again, I'd like to thank Jody for being a guest on the show. I would like to thank all of you for listening. If you feel so inclined to get in touch, you can find us on social media at Lost in Transit PC on Facebook and Twitter, Lost in Transit Podcast on Instagram. You can also email me with any comments, questions, concerns, complaints, lostintransitpc@gmail.com. That has been our podcast for this week. And until next time, get lost.